Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second HOLA 6x8 Recovery Top of Mind webcast. This is episode 2. My name is Jeff Higley, president of the BHN Group, which oversees hotel investment conferences around the world. The uncertainty surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic has led many of us in the hotel industry in search of answers and direction. As I said, this is the 6th and final installment of our first round of the 6x8 series of discussions. Thank you for tuning in today and taking time to listen to some great speakers that we have ahead. Thanks to all the attendees and speakers who have participated in previous webcasts as well, since the series began on May 27th. We've had some great response about the format, about the content, and about the attendees that have joined us. We do plan another round of these events later this year, so please join us then, in most likely starting in August. During the next hour or so, we'll get updates from some of the sharpest hotel minds around as we continue to try to figure out ways to rebound from this deadly disease. So please hang on, we'll be getting to those in a moment. But first, we'd like to extend a warm welcome and a big thank you to First Finish, a sponsor of the 6x8 webcast series. First Finish is a full-service general contractor. It specializes in the successful delivery of fast-track hospitality renovations throughout the Caribbean and across the United States. The company manages every aspect of hotel renovation, from due diligence pricing to FF&E installation and everything in between. Please join me in thanking First Finish, and make sure to check out their services at firstfinish.net. So thank you, First Finish. We greatly appreciate it. Now let's move on to today's program. Excuse me. This webcast, as I said, is HOLA 6x8 Recovery Top of Mind, episode 2, and features 6 experts in their fields as we explore the Caribbean and Latin America region. The experts today include Bruce Wardinski of Playa Hotels and Resorts, Wyndham Hotels and Resorts, Scott LePage, Patricia Boo of STR, Rogerio Basso of IDB Invest, Horwath HTL's John Farid, and Ilan Markoshammer of Banco Sabadell. Today's discussions will provide a unique perspective of the state of the hotel industry throughout the Caribbean and Latin America, but will undoubtedly touch on topics that resonate throughout the globe. It'll be fast-paced, and the time will go quickly. We'll be adhering strictly to the 8-minute time limit, so the speakers have been forewarned. They are going to be quickly moving through a number of topics. Thank you again for joining us, and I want to thank every speaker in advance for being part of the program. There won't be any time for questions, but please do enjoy the program. Okay, so first we'll have Bruce Wardinski. Bruce serves as Chairman, Chief Executive Officer, and Director of Playa Hotels and Resorts. Playa owns and/or manages a total portfolio consisting of 21 all-inclusive resorts comprising 8,172 rooms throughout Mexico and the Caribbean. Bruce was a founding member and currently serves as chairman of the Service Source Foundation, a not-for-profit advocacy group representing people with disabilities. Welcome, Bruce. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, Jeff, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's our pleasure. Thank you for taking time out. I know you've got a lot on your plate with some openings today, so thanks for spending eight minutes with us today. So let's start off with the first question. What's on the top of your mind today, July 1st, 2020?
Well, sure. So, this is appropriate that this panel was today, July 1st, because as you mentioned, we're opening today. So, we've been closed down since about the middle of March at all of our resorts. And today we are opening resorts in Jamaica and Mexico. And later in the month, we'll be opening in the Dominican Republic. So that's kind of a big day for us. That's kind of step one. Step two is, we're focused on, okay, how do we operate and then eventually prosper in, the new world that we all have found ourselves in. When I look strategically at kind of the whole situation, I break it into phases. The first phase for us, probably for everybody, was the shutdown. And so, you know, our focus there was how do we protect our team members? How do we protect our resort properties? And how do we protect our investors? So that was kind of phase one. Second, given all of the uncertainty, you know, we had to focus on financial stabilization, you know, making sure we were in the best financial position we could be. We sold 2 non-core hotels in Jamaica, and we did a private debt and equity deal with Davidson Kempner and raised, you know, enough capital that we feel very comfortable for an extended period of time. And then third, we prepared for today. We worked on protocols. We worked on selling in different ways. You know, everything's new. And so we were focused very much on what we need to do to, number one, convince customers that it's safe, you know, to come to our resorts. But we didn't want it to be just safe. You know, we don't want people feeling like they're going to a hospital or some sterile environment. We wanted to make sure that they were still going to have fun. And so that's been the balance, to make sure people, you know, want to have fun. So they'll feel confident to go, they'll feel safe, but they're going to have a really good time at our resorts. And that's what we think we're going to do. When, you know, I look after today, I, you know, personally believe, you know, that while we've had incredibly challenging times over the last 3+ months, I think the times ahead are probably going to be even more challenging. And so, you know, with those challenges, there will also be opportunities. And so what we're trying to focus on is how we address the challenges and how we take advantage of the opportunities. And so that's, you know, that's what we're focused on. We're very confident, you know, our business model, you know, focused on direct to consumer and partnering with our brand partners, Hyatt and Hilton today, with those relationships will be, you know, a very successful model. We think we should be able to perform better than others, you know, with, you know, all of the resources that they have, as well as our, you know, direct to consumer strategy that's been working very well over the last couple of years. And, you know, things are going to be different. The all-inclusive world going forward is not going to be, you know, the all-inclusive world of the past. I mean, I think every business is going to be different, and ours is not an exception. And so we're focused on how we operate in that new world.
So I got to ask, first thing that came out, did you sleep at all last night in anticipation of today?
So, you know, luckily I don't have to worry as much as you know, our head of operations. Now, he was texting me a lot last night and a lot this morning. And, you know, it was great to see they sent videos. So I saw a video of the first plane landing in Punta Cana. I saw a video of our first guest coming into Cancun and coming into the Hilton Rose Hall in Montego Bay, Jamaica. So it was nice to see, you know, and when I saw those guests, just to see the smile on their face and the excitement, you know, they weren't, you know, feeling like they're guinea pigs or, you know, that they're, you know, there's a risk. I think they were like, hey, finally I can get out and have a vacation and live my life again. So.
You mentioned the operations and, you know, with everything being so different, was there 1 or 2 things that jumped out at you during the last 3.5 months as you were preparing for today that kind of stand out as particularly important issues that you needed to make sure you had under control?
You know, I don't know if there's really one, Jeff. You know, we focus on like every business, you know, all of the things, you know, it's going to be clean and it's going to be safe. And we had to redesign our restaurants and things like that. But, you know, for us, I guess the one thing was what I mentioned earlier, which was to make it fun. You know, so fortunately, you know, our resorts are big. They're airy. We have a lot of outdoor areas. Almost all of our restaurants have an outdoor seating area to begin with. And so what we're trying to do is really make it enjoyable. And people, you know, people can have private cabanas. People can have, you know, private dinners on the beach, whether a couple or a family. You know, what we really try to focus on is how do we make that balance between fun and safety? And I'd say that's the biggest challenge. And then, you know, the other thing was, you know, just meeting all of the government requirements. So just like we're here in the US, where it's state by state by state, similarly for us, it's country by country, and in some cases, state by state. So that's what we're facing.
You mentioned, you know, the all-inclusive model, and it's so labor intensive. How does that change? I'm assuming there's going to even be more labor intensity as time goes on, as we get out of post-COVID. So how does that change now going forward?
Well, in some ways, you know, I think all-inclusive is better suited to deal with the COVID changes than perhaps a typical EP hotel. So, you know, we do have, as you mentioned, we do have pretty substantial number of people providing services. And so what we've done is we said, okay, how do we reallocate those services a little bit and do things differently? But for example, you know, elevators, you know, every hotel anywhere in the world is going to have to be going in every hour and wiping down, you know, the elevator. Well, we do that every hour anyway, because, you know, people are coming in with wet feet and sand. And so we're probably doing our elevators every half hour to begin with. So in many ways, the fact that we are labor intensive is helpful to us. So we're going to have people that, okay, yeah, before this is what you did. Now you have to add, you know, maybe another function or two at the same time. And I can tell you, our team members are so excited just to get back to work. You know, that, you know, when we laid out the new training and the protocols, everyone was completely embracing them. There were no difficulties.
It's got to feel good for you and your entire management team, from top to bottom, to have these people coming back to work. I mean, the whole industry was so shaken by, you know, people not being able to work. So a little bit of a positive thing for you to be able to get these, at least some of the people back online.
Oh, absolutely. And I wish, you know, I wish they were all back online today. You know, while most of our resorts are opening today, many of them aren't. Some will be later this summer, and some couple will be in the fall. Our goal is to get them all open as quickly as possible. I hope the guests show up, the airplanes show up, and we can do that, because, you know, the destinations that we're in, you know, are heavily tourism dependent, and, you know, the people who live in those countries in the regions that we're at, you know, they rely on tourism, and we want them to be able to take care of themselves and their families.
So we're at about a minute and a half to go in our 8 minutes. Two quick questions then. You mentioned airplanes, airlift, very important for the region. How do you see that shaking out? Do you see it coming back to anywhere near normal in the foreseeable future?
So near normal, no, but I think we may, again, you know, at the leisure destinations, capture a better than fair share. And the reason I say that is airlines are economic animals. And, you know, a lot of people are not going to be going to cities, and given the, you know, surge in a number of states in the US, they're not going to be going to certain cities in certain states. So I think from our standpoint, you know, the airlines are going to want to fly where people want to go. And so we're seeing, you know, a bunch of the airlines adding new routes in to our destinations every week. And so they're economic animals. I hope they'll be coming. Very
good. So Bruce, the final question of the day for you, and I'm going to ask this throughout to all of the speakers today. Try to put a positive side to things, as this is our final segment of this series for now. What's the one thing the hotels industry in the Caribbean and Latin America can be optimistic about? Sure. So for me, it's customer sentiment. And, you know, I just saw a recent poll, and it's very consistent with polls I've seen, you know, in the past. And it said, first of all, that people want to travel. And what they want to do is go on leisure trips. That's number one. What type of leisure trip? This is globally now. What type of leisure trip do they want? They want a beach trip. And the number one location for beach trips, and again, these are global respondents, were the Caribbean and Mexico. And so I'm like, that's to me the positive. People want to go, they want to go to the beach, and they want to go to the beaches where we're located, and please come. And I think that's what the Caribbean and Mexico should be excited about. And as long as they do it safely and smartly, I think we'll continue to start. We'll make sure they do. All right, perfect. That's a great way to look at things. So thank you very much, Bruce Wardinski. We greatly appreciate you being part of it, a part of today's conversation with so much going on. So thanks, Bruce, and look forward to seeing you sooner than later, hopefully in person. Great, Jeff. Thank you so much. Okay, take care and good luck. Okay, so some excellent insight from Bruce, the all-inclusive segment. Next up, we have Scott LePage, who was recently named President of the Americas for Wyndham Hotels and Resorts after serving in various leadership roles for the company for the past decade. Wyndham has about 220 hotels in Latin America and the Caribbean. Howard Johnson with 48, the Wyndham brand with 39 lead the way. Scott is a former naval officer who has led teams in the Gulf and Pacific over his 10-year Navy career. Scott, first of all, congratulations on the new gig. I know you are getting just inundated with information about the entire Americas, but congratulations and thank you for being here. Welcome.
I really appreciate the opportunity to be on, and it's great to take on an expanded role where I get to work not only with North America, but the Latin America part of our organization. It's a great group and an exciting area of the world to be involved in.
Very good. I know you know a lot of those people that work with you down in the region, so I'm sure it'll be, you know, some reunions in some regard. So let's get right to the start. I got to start my timer here. Let's get right to the top of the mind question. What is on the top of your mind as you start this this journey in your career?
Well, Jeff, there's two things as I look at going into the second half of 2020. I share Bruce's excitement about opening hotels. We've been able to keep most of the Wyndham system open throughout this time period. In Latin America, we have had a number of hotels that were closed, but we're on the upswing. And the two concepts that really are top of my mind as we look at the going into the second half of the year and really the recovery efforts. The first one is agility. And what we're seeing is as we open our hotels, as we bring our hotels back online, looking for the guests and the business and the opportunity, it's about keeping that creative approach, finding out where the business is going to come from. This is a unique, hopefully a once in a lifetime scenario that we're all going through. And there's really no rule book to find out or to figure out how to successfully run our businesses and support our hotel customers throughout this time period. We've got the people on the ground that are coming up with the unique ideas and doing the work to find out where is that business, where is it coming from, and how do we get it into our hotels. I think the area that's been the most surprising is, and it makes sense maybe in hindsight, but that's been a surprise at how strongly it's come back, has been the return of local leisure business to the hotels. And that's been consistent across various regions within the world, that as folks get to their second month, third month of quarantine, when they're given the opportunity to head out, they're going to hop in their car, drive to the nearest location. As Bruce talked about, a lot of them do tend to like the beaches, so I think his hotels are in great shape, and we've seen a lot of the same. So finding ways to connect with those customers and attract them to the hotels that we've got there, and drive that business to help out running the hotels and the owners of those hotels. So that's agility is one of the key top of mind elements for us. The other one is communication. And there's so many areas that the communication is important. One of the first is connecting with customers, making sure they understand what we're doing to promote safe travel. At Wyndham, we call it Count on Us. I love that phrase because it means it symbolizes that we've got people behind the efforts. As Bruce talked about, he's got folks in their hotels that are used to cleaning the hotels, that are used to taking care of the resorts that they run. We've got the same thing. We've taken the time to put our methodology into a Count on Us policy and procedure. And so ensuring that our guests know that we're out there taking care of them, taking care of the hotels. Getting the communication out to our owners. In Latin America and the Caribbean, there are a lot of owners that are waiting to hear the right time to open. And we want to make sure that they don't miss this key window. So we're out there working with them, talking to them about what business is coming back, how best to get their hotel ready to open, what type of customers are out there, and then just communication within our organization. As you talked about, safety is a key factor here. So making sure that our team members and the folks working in our hotels are able to come to work, feel safe, run a hotel, provide a service, and run our business effectively. So as we work through the rest of 2020 and into next year, the ability to be creative and find that business, and then staying in touch with all those various customer groups and stakeholders who we got will continue to be critical for Wyndham.
So clearly, getting one thing at a time. We've got to get hotels back open. We've got to get consumers back into those hotels. But growth for the company is important too. So what makes the Caribbean and Latin America attractive to Wyndham for expansion, and kind of how do you go about that with with COVID scenario in place?
Love growth. It's always a key part of keeping the successful track for our business. And Latin America and the Caribbean have been a key element of growth for Wyndham. There's a couple things that I think make the market attractive. And one of them is the number of hotels that are in each of these countries. There's a lot of hotels that are out there. We feel that with Wyndham and the systems that we have, the policies, the people that we can put on the ground, the support processes, we've got a lot of value to add. So we look at it as a great opportunity to connect with hotel owners in each of the countries that are out there, whether it's in the Caribbean or Brazil, Argentina, or the many countries that make up this region. There's just a great connection and a great opportunity for both Wyndham and these hotels as we look at the opportunity to grow. An indicator of why that's been working is our success in 2020 is in line with what we saw in 2019. So we do feel that value continues to be recognized.
How's the recovery going for you guys? Clearly there's a lot of steps to go. The occupancy remains relatively low throughout the globe. But how's it going for you? How would you characterize it?
In Latin America and the Caribbean right now, what we're seeing is that recovery is a little bit slower than in other areas of the world. Now there's certainly a downside to that in terms of occupancy, but the upside is there's some lessons learned. And within Wyndham as a global organization, we've taken the opportunity to learn from the China and Asia Pacific recovery as we look at Europe, which shares its own situations. So in Latin America, I feel like we've got a real opportunity for the recovery to happen in a way that's a very positive scenario for each of the hotels. We have an initiative down there that we call, and my Spanish is a little rusty, but I'm working on it, but Puerta Abierta, which means open doors. And it involves all of those key factors in helping the hotels understand what preparation should be. We're using Zoom, this technology that we're all getting used to, do virtual meetings with these hotels. We're doing the same with our clients and customers that stay at our hotels to ensure they know what's going on, what the status of the hotel is, and when and where they can stay. So the recovery overall can't happen fast enough for all of us. But I think what we'll continue to see is as this local business builds, we're excited about being in the right place at the right time, and then gaining that and building on that consumer confidence is what will help not just each hotel, but our organization and the industry overall get through this and be there successfully and profitably as business comes back to normal.
So open doors, open borders, open skies. We're looking forward to all that openness as this recovery starts taking shape. Got about 30 seconds or so, Scott, for the final question. Again, looking at the positive things here. What's the one thing the hotel industry in the Caribbean and Latin America can be optimistic about?
I think the biggest thing is that this crisis, this challenge, more than anything, has allowed us to identify the ways that we as an industry can add value to hotel owners, to the travel industry, and to the countries in which we work. The policies and procedures that we came out with right at the beginning of this crisis have worked. They've kept our guests safe. They've been a key part to keeping the industry going. And so very excited about how we're going to continue to take the lessons learned through what we've done and build on that for what's ahead.
Very good. Scott LePage, again, congratulations on your new role. We thank you very much for being here and sharing your insight, and look forward to seeing you sooner than later in person.
Anytime. Thank you. Okay.
Take care, Scott. Thank you. Okay, so 2 down. Next up, we have Patricia Bowe, STR's Area Director for Central and South America. Patricia is joining us from Colombia. She's responsible for STR's expansion throughout Latin America. She spent her early career in the hotel industry at the property level between Madrid and London until she joined STR in 2008. Again, my pleasure to be a former colleague of Patricia. It's always great to see you, Patricia. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's certainly our pleasure. So let's get right to the question at hand. What's on the top of your mind today as we start the second half of 2020?
Well, Jeff, I think top of my mind is something that a lot of people, not only in the region, but in general, are asking themselves, certainly for me personally and professionally. And it's kind of when this will be over, right? we are seeing, particularly here, a very long and straight lockdown over the region, but particularly in Colombia, where I'm based, as you said. So if we combine this along with the situation, health system deficiencies, the economy, poverty, there's a lot of social aspects that definitely worry me and that put a lot of pressure in the region. So if I think of the hospitality industry, here it will be the last one to open up. So it's definitely something that is constantly on my mind. As you well know, at STR, we're constantly monitoring hotel performance worldwide. And what I'm following very closely is any demand changes around the world, trying to figure out any sort of commonalities, similarities that can help us to understand what could happen and what we can expect in Latin America. And I think like Bruce and Scott both already mentioned the leisure demand, I think is gonna be key. But as I say, here we are in our 4th month of quarantine, so the recovery period seems to be, or is very likely to be a bit longer. So that's definitely something that is in my mind.
So the recovery period, what's been the reopenings for you? I know it varies by country, of course, and in some cases by state or even by city. In general, what's the reopening process right now? Is it still very early on? Have some areas a little further along?
Yeah, it really depends country by country. So we have some examples, like if we think of Argentina, Buenos Aires is still pretty much in a lockdown, but there's other regions where there hasn't been any cases and they are open up for business now. So it's really good for certain regions. As I say, Colombia is still on a lockdown and we are until the 15th of this month for now. So we'll see how that goes. Peru just opening up as well. Each country is taking, a different timeline to open it up, and they are doing it in phases like we've seen in Europe and in other parts of the world.
What about the data itself? Have there been any, I'll say, surprises in the data in the region as it begins to maybe start reopening and bouncing back from the pandemic?
I wish I'd see more spikes as such in the data. But to be honest, since the 2nd, 3rd week of March, Mexico, Caribbean, South America, if we look at the average occupancy, it hasn't been over 15–16%. And that's based on open hotels, right? So we're not counting the 60–70% of hotels that in many places have seen closing or that they're still closed. So the only spikes as such that we've seen on the data is on those markets and for those hotels that are open that have taken frontline professionals or quarantine guests. Lima is a very good example, with the government initiative that they kept hotels open and operating on an average of 40%, although with discounted rates, obviously. But that's what we've seen temporarily. Other markets, Panama City, saw a few spikes in regards to that frontline professionals, and the same with Rio, but not much more for now.
STR works with a vast array of company types throughout the industry. So you deal with a lot of different clients. What's a common question that they might be asking you that you're getting from them, and how do you respond to that? What do they ask you most often?
Well, as you've seen us, we do a lot of webinars, right? I think STR, me and all my regional colleagues, we've been focusing on providing to the industry as much data as we can to understand what is happening and prepare for trying to learn really from China and Asia. Now we're looking at Europe very closely. So the majority of the clients, they always asking me is if we can really compare the situation with what we're seeing in China, Europe, or even the US, if it's really comparable with Latin America. And I don't know if I have an answer for that. I do think that a strong domestic demand which has been the main sign of recovery for all those regions, is going to have an impact, and I think is where the hotels should be focusing on. Obviously, the ones that have a strong domestic demand, like Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, I think they can benefit from that. And also looking at the secondary markets, like we've seen in China, that was a big surprise for many. So people really want to get out of the big cities. And I think that's kind of where we're going at the moment. If I think of the Caribbean, and I know Bruce was very already mentioning that, you know, the dependency from international travelers and obviously the airlift is one of the questions as to, you know, if the flights get there, I think people will want to go. I think the demand is hungry for holidays. I mean, I'm certainly am.
So you mentioned the Caribbean. Is it shaping up okay now? I mean, we're starting to see some countries open up very slowly, but, you know, and as Bruce said, you know, it's going to be some time, and it won't be instant full occupancy overnight. But you've got to be encouraged by the hotels like Bruce is opening. So in general, Caribbean kind of going along the same path as Latin America.
I think the moment that we've seen the airlift is going to come back. It's going to be a very slow pace because some people are still afraid of traveling. But I think that the main restriction is not even the people's eagerness to travel, is more the different restrictions within the countries. Because you know, Bruce was mentioning how every country or every state has a different policy and different requirements. And I think with the borders, it's going to be the same. So it's not just your country able to receive people, but the country, you know, whoever is sending the demand, whether they allowing that traffic. So I think that's going to be the main problem. We are July 1st, so I don't really have the data yet to really talk about any changes in performance for the Caribbean, but we know that they're looking at opening up from July. So hopefully, you know, in the next few comments, our daily data will show us some movement, and I'll be happy to report that for sure.
We will all keep an eye out for the data for Latin America and the Caribbean, crossing our fingers that we'll see some incremental improvement. So final 30 seconds here, Patricia. What's the one thing the hotel industry in the Caribbean and Latin America can be optimistic about?
I don't want to repeat myself, but I think that people's intentions to travel are very strong. And, you know, people are resilient. I think the industry is very resilient. So we have that in favor. And Latin America has so much to offer. So I think that's going to come back. It's probably going to take longer than we all would like to see, but it's definitely going to come back. And I also see a great opportunity for more domestic and interregional travel and collaboration. So, you know, I think the region can really come out stronger if it's united. And I'm looking forward to see more regional traveling. I think that's missing here.
Very good. Excellent insight, Patricia. Thank you so much for being here. Always a pleasure. As I said earlier, best wishes to you, STR, and we'll see you sooner than later in person, providing data at one of our conferences.
I hope so. Thank you so much, Jeff. Thanks a lot.
All right, Patricia. Thank you. Have a good day. Okay, so next is Rogerio Basso. Rogerio has more than 20 years of real estate and hospitality experience. He leads all initiatives related to tourism in Latin America and the Caribbean for IDB Invest, the private sector division of the Inter-American Development Bank Group. So he's responsible for origination, transactions, and executing the firm's tourism strategy throughout the region. So Rogerio, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Happy to be here. Hello, Jeff.
So let's start with the question of the day. What's on the top of your mind today as we start the second half of the year?
Absolutely. Look, in general, I'm an optimist, but I'm not blinded by the fact that we're going through a delicate situation, and it is going to be a tough recovery. You know, having said that, I think our sector is very resilient. We've been able to resurface from other financial crises, from other regional pandemics, and I don't see that the situation is going to be any different to that. Now, what keeps me up at night, really two things. First is how to promote government involvement in the sector, and secondly, how to inject liquidity into the system. So on the first topic, what we're seeing is that the magnitude of this crisis is such that the private sector cannot do it alone. We have seen a variety of measures from various governments to try to stabilize and reignite the economy, but there have been very few countries that have provided a sector-specific support. So if you look at the Caribbean, where 15.5% of GDP is tourism-based, you need a government to take a leadership role in demonstrating their commitment and focus to the sector. Otherwise, a significant number of jobs are going to be at stake. At the same time, you want these businesses to prosper, because when a hotel fails, it's going to impact the rest of the value chain, especially because the sector is so informal in certain regions of Caribbean and Latin America. So I think this idea of having government support to reignite the system is key. On the issue of liquidity, and basically what we're seeing is what Bruce mentioned before, that on the first phase, there was a lot of focus on protecting employees, guests, vendors. A lot of these facilities were being used for first responders to quarantine certain residents that were stranded abroad. And you also saw that owners were approaching their lenders asking for flexibility on financial aspects, being able to tap into reserves, being able to get some covenant relief so that these loans were not breached and didn't go into default. And all of those measures provided a little bit of breathing room for the sector. But now we enter a second phase, and what's really important here is that reopening does not equate to recovery. There is going to be a mismatch between revenues and expenses. If there is any trepidation on the way that demand picks up, which is very likely, there is going to be a solvency, a liquidity issue in a lot of these businesses, especially when you look into Q4 and Q1 of next year. So I think if there's a way that we can inject liquidity into the system, knowing that the businesses are going to be quite fragile, that is going to be quite important.
So the liquidity question, it basically boils down, liquidity equals cash flow, and cash flow is pretty much stopped for most, if not all, hotels in the region. So you have to get consumers kind of moving on that, right? Is that how liquidity gets back, or what are your thoughts on how it comes back into the system?
Well, I think we view it slightly different. From the Inter-American Development Bank side, we have a unique window to the world, because we have the public area of our business, which focuses on sovereign lending, and then we have the private side on IDB Invest. So the first step that we took was engaging with all of the ministers of tourism of our 26 member countries, trying to understand what was important to them in order to come out of this pandemic. And although there was a variety of topics that were discussed, from financial support to retraining employees to providing tracing systems, the consensus was that we needed biosecurity protocols throughout the region. And then we engaged in a second discussion around what would be important to effectively implement these protocols throughout the region. And there we invited the private sector as well to engage in the discussion. And the outcome from that exercise was basically that there were 4 areas that we needed to focus on. First, health, making sure that these protocols, they were actually effective, basically that they worked. Second, one of processes. There are so many protocols out there that it's very easy for you to get lost and causes a little bit of confusion. There's an issue around the governance, making sure that as these protocols are implemented, they cover the entire tourism value chain, not only airlines and hotels, as an example. And lastly, what you're mentioning about demand, that this is a crisis of confidence, so you need to build a comfort without raising false expectations that when you go somewhere, not only you're gonna be safe, but you're going to have an enjoyable moment. Much like Bruce said, you don't want people to be feeling as if they're going into a hospital. They want this to be fun. So our focus right now as an institution is one of identifying ways in which these protocols can be implemented in a way that is relatively standardized and can provide that level of comfort. Now, from a private sector perspective, I think our focus has been how to bring this liquidity, into the system, which is creating some facilities that cover a variety of businesses within the tourism sector. So think about it from the perspective of we approach a government and create a $100 million facility. Government comes in with a first loss position, thereby to demonstrate their commitment and focus and willingness to support the sector. And then we team up with a local banking partner and share that second loss on a 50-50 basis. And that way we can touch a much larger sample of hotels and tourism businesses so that they don't become insolvent. And having that extra cash, having those reserves are gonna give you the confidence that you can reopen. And even if there is some trepidation in demand, you will be able to sustain through that uncertainty going forward.
We're in the closing minute of our segment. These things go by so fast. So 2 real quick questions for you. In a word or a phrase, how would you describe the lending environment in the Caribbean and Latin America?
Look, as an institution, more than a bank, we are a development agency. We are countercyclical. We have doubled down on the region. We have increased our exposure from about $5 billion to $7 billion. So we want to continue to support. Year to date, we are tracking very well against that target. But our focus is primarily on ongoing businesses. We're looking at businesses as of December 2019. If there were good businesses that were just affected by COVID, we are willing to invest and support them. On the project finance side, greenfield, we are being much more cautious, and mainly because it's very difficult to do the underwriting in this environment, looking into construction costs, looking into permits and approvals. That uncertainty downgrades the quality of the transaction, and thereby we're being a bit more cautious on some of those deals.
Okay, the final question then, Rogerio, in 30 seconds. What's the one thing the hotel industry in the Caribbean and Latin America can be optimistic about?
Look, I think what we've seen is that the sector has been very collaborative amongst each other. There's been a lot of unity. You saw how the hospitality leaders got together, went up to Washington and asked for sector-specific support. You have seen a series of task forces being put together for people to think about solutions to the problem. So I think that position of generally, and even this webinar, the genuine interest in trying to find solutions and help and come up with, talk about best practices and lessons learned, that is quite unique. That didn't maybe exist to the same extent before. And just as a parallel, you take a Volvo. Volvo in 1959 came up with the three-point seat belt, right? They understood that was so important that they could simply not share with other participants. So they decided to provide their seatbelt design to others and therefore save a lot of lives. So I guess my call to the industry right now would be, if you've come up with an innovative idea that can save lives, that can accelerate the recovery, share it with the sector, share it with others, because we simply cannot afford not to do that at this stage.
Very good. We've heard so much about cash, but I'm hearing from you collaboration is king, and I just love that Love the way that sounds. So Rogerio, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for your insight and for being here. Always good to catch up with you, and look forward to seeing you down the road sooner than later.
I want to bump into you into an airport.
Amen. Amen. Okay. Thank you, Rogerio.
Bye.
Have a good rest of the week. Okay, moving on. Up
Thank
now is John Farid, Managing Director and Chairman of North America for Horwath HTL. Over the past 20 years, John's consulting clients have included Fortune 500 companies, national brands, lenders, developers, you name it, he's worked with them. He's internationally recognized authority in the field of strategic market planning, positioning, and repositioning. John, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate the invite. This has been so good so far. Really enjoying it.
Well, thank you. Let's keep the good rolling here, okay? So what's on the top of your mind these days?
You know, I've been thinking about that. I have to say, it's a great question. My concern, I'm not quite as rosy as a lot of people are on this, because we're dealing with some hard issues, and particularly for some clients. And what I want to point out is that little of our turnaround from a hospitality perspective, if we talk about the industry, is up to us. So much of it, in my opinion, I think that in terms of the recovery, I think we're going to be in a real challenge unless we look to our government and municipalities and what their regulations or restrictions are going to be. We need to know when they're going to be opening up their borders and to whom. We need to know what those restrictions are going to be and how they're going to affect us. I mean, if we look at here, even in the US, it's a frustrating game, because now we have states who are requiring visitors from other states internally to stay for 14-day quarantine if they're going to come visit. I happen to be in Florida today in Orlando, and it's quite a challenge now when we start looking at travel. Where can we go? We have clients in Hawaii who are suffering very much, because Hawaii has shuttered basically, and they've moved their 14-day minimum quarantine if you want to come to the island from they were going to lift it at the end of June. Now they've pushed it back to the end of July. They're saying in early August. But I think as we're seeing what's happening on the left, on the West Coast, the left side of the U.S., that may change if we go, if we really look at that. The other thing is airlift. So we're dependent on airlift to get people into Latin America from their primary markets, unless it's domestic. But even domestic is going to require airlift from country to country or island to island. And again, we don't really have a lot of control over those two issues. And finally, I would say we need to spend more time in looking at how do we instill confidence in the traveling consumer. There's a lot of yes, positive sentiments. The latest one that came out says 44% of American consumers, which is a big market for Caribbean and Latin America, arguably the biggest, only 44% say that they're looking to travel this year, 2020. And of those, about 67, 68%, I believe, are looking to travel by car. So we know that while the sentiment, I want to get out, I want to do something to travel, is high, it's not necessarily high for traveling overseas. We also have to remember that a lot of these consumers in the very beginning of COVID got burned. They got stuck in a destination for an extended period of time, or they got stuck on a cruise ship. Friends and family saw this, and a lot of people who had travel that was planned and got canceled are still waiting on the deposits to come back. Here we are in July, and they've still not received their deposits from trips that were scheduled in March or April from the airlines and the cruise lines and the OTAs. So there's some concerns out there. I recently had one of my team members, my own team members, sophisticated traveler, ask a question, well, what happens if I go visit this island for a project, John, and I get stuck there in quarantine for 14 days? Or what happens if I get sick? Is the healthcare going to be good there? So I think that we really have to focus not just on our industry. We can't just look at there. We need to really be paying attention to what's going on with the government in terms of restrictions across the region. How is that affecting airlift? And how do we really focus on not this message of cleanliness? That's going to be an expectation. That's a new standard. it has been pushed, but really focus on how do we instill in them that they're going to be safe. Talk about healthcare, talk about not getting stuck, and talk about getting my money back if I have to cancel. And those are key issues.
So John, let's flip a little bit and talk about the property level itself, particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean. The potential for repositioning and or rebranding as the pandemic goes down the line, and then eventually we hope, is behind us. If someone out there is considering that, what's the one thing they should be thinking about now, even if they're closed?
So if I was giving a client advice on strategic repositioning or strategic market planning, I think right now I would look at two things primarily. One is take a parasitic approach to everything that you're doing. In other words, do everything that you can possibly to steal more than your fair share of the market, whether that's through partners or through your own digital endeavors or whatnot. Pay attention to your pricing, and you really want to scoop up as much of that market as you possibly can away from your comp set, and particularly if you're in a smaller destination. And then the other thing is I would probably work to position down as opposed to up. Instead of going further up the Lux ladder, I would probably head downward. People are going to be looking for good value. They're going to be looking for more simple opportunities as it relates to travel experiences. People still have concerns. We're getting a lot of feedback that they're concerned about, okay, can I go swimming? Can I go to the spa? Can I, there's a lot of questions about that. And I think we're seeing extended stay where everything's kind of in one room for you is winning that battle. But I think I would simplify. Simplify.
That's and interesting that you say down brand rather than up brand. Time for two more quick questions, John. Realizing that they vary greatly by market and product type, what are the general thoughts about hotel valuations in the foreseeable future in the Caribbean and Latin America?
Well, I think we're going to be looking obviously at making some major changes given the COVID and looking at the values. The values have always been obviously taking in a lot of factors. And the matrix that we're looking at right now in terms of starts more with the destination, where are we with COVID, again, back to government regulations and whatnot. But instead of just looking at ADR and occupancy and RevPAR, we're also going to be looking at consumer intentions and sentiment to that area. We're going to be looking at the government restrictions in those areas and airlift and those types of things. And we're going to be looking to see how the hotel, the asset, was managed to reduce expenses and hang on to cash. So there's going to be a lot of factors that are going to new play into when we look at asset values.
Okay, final question, John, 30 seconds. Let's end this on a positive note. What's the one thing the hotel industry in the Caribbean and Latin America specifically can be optimistic about?
Well, I think that it's in tune with some of our other speakers. I'm kind of with Bruce on this. If we look at the Horwath Caribbean market report from last year, we had unprecedented demand and arrivals. So clearly there's an opportunity that's going to be, I guess, pent up demand that's going to want to flow into the market. As soon as we understand those restrictions and we do have airlift and consumers feel good about it, I think we're going to see a return to normal business more quickly than we would expect.
Fantastic. That's a great thought to kind of end on, John. So thank you for your insight. Always appreciated. Love catching up with you. Let's again, down the road in person. Let's hope that's sooner than later.
Thank you, Jeff.
All right, John, take care. Okay, we're in the home stretch here. Final speaker of the day. As usual, I award the Patience Award to the final speaker. Ilan Marco-Schamer is Senior Vice President, Commercial Real Estate, Hospitality, and Tourism at Banco Sabadell, with a career span of over 20 years and experience in multitude of facets ranging from operations to financial advisory to investment management. Ilan his life quest is to create the perfect union between the art and the business of hospitality, aligning often competing interests of profitability, with those of social well-being and the health of the environment. Very good words to live by. Elon, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Thanks for inviting me, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start with the question of the day for you. What's on the top of your mind here on July 1st, 2020?
So it's been pretty much the same for the past 3 or 4 months, and obviously it has evolved over the period that we've spent in quarantine. This has been a very humanizing experience, I think, for all of us as human beings, as professionals. And you can't help thinking about the human toll that this crisis has produced, the loss of jobs, the loss of livelihood for many people in our industry, in other industries. And so before anything else, before even when talking with clients, even before getting into business, I always want to ask about personally how they're doing, how their families are doing. And it's a time when we show our true colors, so to speak. And then on the business side, well, as a financial institution, as a global bank, so clearly with a lot of exposure to hospitality and specifically to leisure markets in the Americas that are airlift dependent. So we've been clearly affected, and we've been playing defense for the past 3 months. Fortunately, we are a fairly conservative bank. We've been around for 135 years, been through some crises, to say the least. And so we're very selective about who we work with. So thankfully, our portfolio so far is healthy. We're about 80% of our portfolio in the Americas has been worked out, meaning we've formalized some sort of forbearance agreement and are providing help and liquidity to our sponsors. And then we have a couple of deals left where those discussions are ongoing. So for the short to medium term, we've been supportive to our clients, and obviously at the same time looking after the interest of our shareholders. So it's a delicate balance between making sure that you're a good industry partner while at the same time limiting our exposure and protecting our revenue stream.
You're right. It's a very fine line in this kind of day and age, especially with the financial situation the way it is. So how would you describe that situation in the Caribbean and Latin America? If you had to use a word or a phrase, a family-friendly word or phrase, how would you describe it?
Well, it's a market that has evolved substantially. I've been working in the industry for 20 years, and the market today looks a lot different than it did 20 years ago. A lot more institutional players, a lot more institutional money backing owners. But still, compared to the US, compared to Europe, the level of institutionality is still relatively small. And so liquidity, even in good times, is still something that is not as easy to come by. It's not as easy to capitalize deals. And therefore, in a crisis situation, it's become quite dire. And the first casualties that we've seen are in the airlines. So we've seen local and regional airlines like Aeromexico, Avianca, LATAM, Copa file for bankruptcy for obvious reasons. And while in the US, there are remedies available through government help and through emergency financing facilities, in Latin America and the Caribbean, it's quite a different story. So liquidity has been a word that's been used a lot in this session, and there's a human side to it, which I touched on at the beginning of my intro, and then there's the liquidity issue. that is very prominent and top of mind for us and for owners.
So what piece of advice would you give to an owner, let's say a non-institutional owner? What piece of advice would you give to them if they're struggling with their loans and obviously no liquidity?
Right. So hopefully even if it's not an institutional owner, what we see a lot in Latin America and the Caribbean is high net worth money. And that hopefully, and in our case, we know for a fact that it's in most cases, these are owners that can stand behind their assets. So banks such as ourselves and some of our friendly competitors in the region have been quite accommodating, but it's a two-way street. So there needs to be a strong sponsor and equity behind any solution that we might provide. And I mean, it's no secret, and it's almost even a cliche saying it, this industry is capital intensive and people intensive. And in a moment of crisis, it becomes so evident. So the projects that are going to survive, the properties that are going to survive are those that are backed by strong sponsors that can step up their equity and work with us to find solutions. And unfortunately, there will be casualties.
Seems that the key seems to be working with you. So reaching out to you if they're having problems, addressing it right away, not waiting to be approached. They should be calling their lender.
Well, of course. I mean, that's normal practice, and most of our borrowers didn't take even a day to call us, and and we have very good relationships with pretty much all of our borrowers, and a solution as the other speakers have mentioned, particularly Rogerio. The solution requires multiple parts working together. So clearly, the owner of the asset who has most at stake needs to step up. We as banks have the interest on keeping the businesses that collateralize our loans as healthy as possible. And then multilateral organizations such as the IDB and individual governments that depend so much on tourism also have a stake and should and in many cases are stepping up in order to help alleviate the situation by providing liquidity mainly.
All right, Ilan, time flies here. Final 30 seconds. What's the one thing the hotel industry in the Caribbean and Latin America can be optimistic about?
So leisure is a human necessity. It's not something that can be digitized out. It's something that, regarding of the economic strata, it's something that every human being wants. And the region offers some of the most attractive destinations in the world. So unfortunately, a lot of this recovery, as my colleagues have talked about already, is out of our control. And it's dependent on government action, it's dependent on science. But to the extent that we continue doing what we're doing as an industry to address customers' needs, when the time is right, the demand will come back to the destinations. There will be a gravitation towards quality. So destinations that have the better infrastructure, the better visitor amenities, the better tourism product in general will recover quicker. And the ones that are not will struggle for longer.
Okay. Ilan, thank you very much for being here, sharing your thoughts with us today. Appreciate it very much. Best wishes for the rest of the summer and beyond. And again, I hope to see you sooner than later in person to hear your thoughts again.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
Okay, take care.
Take care.
Okay, so here we are. We're in the closing session here, the final seconds, final minutes here. Just another thank you to First Finish, our sponsor for this webcast. We greatly appreciate your support, First Finish, and the entire team there. Don't forget, right now we're still planning for the Chris and Ola conferences in September at the Seminole Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Hollywood. Obviously, the situation is very fluid, and we are keeping an eye on it in terms of whether we move forward live or virtual. But as of this moment, we are going forward with it. So we hope you can join us there. We'll also have a digital component for that either way. So we hope to see you either live or digital virtual aspect there. And thank you, First Finish. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. Thank you to Tricia Gregg, who has done the 6x8 series flawlessly from as the producer. You've done a great job, Tricia. We can't say enough about that. Thank you very much. Thanks to all of our speakers, all of you, our attendees. You mean a lot to us, so we want to keep bringing you information that's important to you. Best wishes to you. Be well, be safe, and have a great rest of the week.